Hello, my name is Diane, and today I want to talk about The Princess of Thornwood Drive by Khalia Moreau. This is a debut novel. It is half contemporary, half fantasy. We alternate points of view between two characters, and as we do, we also alternate genres. This book follows two sisters, Lane and Alyssa, who, although they live together, they live in very different worlds. Lane lives in the contemporary world. She works at a cafe. She teaches horseback riding lessons. And she's also the caretaker for her sister Alyssa, who was left paralyzed and nonverbal in an accident that killed their parents a year prior to the start of the story. Lane's world is one of bills and stress and a heavy guilt surrounding the accident. She's blamed herself for what happened. And that, along with her love for her sister, is what keeps her working so hard and stressing so much to provide care for Alyssa and make sure she has everything that she needs. Alyssa, on the other hand, is living in a world of fantasy. In her reality, she and her sister are princesses, and a year prior to the start of the story, she and her parents were attacked. Her parents, the king and queen, were kidnapped, and she was cursed. Her world is full of magic and mythical creatures and this looming darkness that eventually she's going to have to face to save her family and her kingdom. I loved the bond between the sisters in this book, even though we don't really get to see it directly. You can tell that these sisters very much love and care about one another because of the divide in their realities and because Alyssa was left nonverbal in that accident. They're never able to directly communicate with one another, or in Alyssa's reality, she was cursed, and that is what's keeping her from communicating directly. So even though these stories seem very separate, they very closely parallel one another. We see Lane struggling to provide the care that Alyssa needs. Financially, that is a very heavy burden to take on. Never mind emotionally, she feels very guilty about the accident. She's determined to find any way she can to make this work and make sure that she's the one seeing that Alyssa is actually being cared for. She doesn't want to just give her into a system where someone else will be responsible for Alyssa. Even though that would be easier, there's no way for Lane to know that Alyssa's really getting cared for unless she is a part of the process herself. And then in Alyssa's world, she's navigating this very magical place. There's a lot going on in this fantasy world, although none of it's ever really explicitly stated how the magic works, what the actual world is. But it felt like there definitely are rules and limitations to that magic. It's not just endless convenience. It does feel like there's definitely some sense to this world, although it's never flat out explained to us. I know some people really like their magic systems broken down or the world building to actually be explained. We don't get very much of that at all in this story, which personally I was fine with. I think it made sense for this story. You can kind of figure out what's what and who's who for the most part. There are definitely a lot of interesting creatures and things, some characters that we meet in Alyssa's world that I'm not really sure how they translate to Lane's world, but I was perfectly happy to just go along for that ride with Alyssa and figure things out as we went. I didn't find it very confusing as someone who reads a lot of fantasy. And I would say that Alyssa's world is really just the same things going on in Lane's world, but seen through a fantasy lens, which is why I think it didn't need too much explanation. Although there are definitely some moments within the story that really blurred the lines between contemporary and fantasy. It kind of makes you question how much magic is actually possible within the story, within both worlds of the story. And I thought that was really cool to see that you could see this as two separate worlds. One of them is the real world and one of them is actually a magical world where there is some magic that could bleed into reality, or you could just say that that's Alyssa's perception of things since the accident happened. There's definitely a little room for interpretation there of what things actually mean in Alyssa's side of the story. And I think that's really cool. I think the parallels were really cool, how closely they follow one another, that the plot is constantly progressing as we move between the two, even though we're seeing it through a very different lens. The two halves very much complemented one another. On top of that, we just tackle a lot of different topics throughout this story, but I think they were all blended really well together. I think all of the different elements, different themes that we talk about worked well together in developing a full story that felt very cohesive. We see some just everyday stressors from working, difficult customers, horseback riding, problems within the healthcare system on a more serious end. We talk about grief and guilt, particularly through Lane's side of the story. There is some family tension beyond just the immediate family of Lane and Alyssa. We do see a little bit more of their family as things unfold. There is a little bit of romance that all developed in a way that felt very natural and believable. There are some classic fantasy elements. We have fairies and mermaids, and also some creatures specifically from Trinidadian folklore. So there's a lot of different cool things happening in this story that all made sense within the story. There are also some twists that happened along the way that I didn't see coming, but also didn't feel too surprising, where they felt like they came out of nowhere. So I really enjoyed that. I don't really like being able to guess everything that was going to happen, and I really wasn't sure where we were making our way to towards the end of the story. But also, all of the things that did happen weren't surprising in an unbelievable way. They were just surprising in a way that made me want to keep going. The writing of the story was very descriptive without being flowery. We're seeing these in first-person point of view, so you're kind of going through the thoughts of Lane and Alyssa as they're having conversations, as they're realizing things and figuring things out. We're really seeing things through their eyes. We're in their heads the whole time. And I thought both of their stories were really compelling. The story is divided into 3 sections, and I think the first section really set the tone for what's going on, how this story is going to work, and introducing anything that we needed to progress. And then once the story was established, I was really hooked getting through the second and especially the third parts of the story. Things definitely got more intense. It became way more of a page turner for me. And once I settled into what was going on, I was very eager to see what was going to happen next. There are some emotional moments, as I'm sure you can guess, with the themes that are within this. There are some pretty intense moments once the plot really picks up. It got almost a thriller feel to it. There are also some genuinely funny moments that had me laughing out loud. Once we get into the more intense parts of the story and things are building, we do get occasional small moments to break the tension and bring things back a little bit, ground our characters a little bit. And overall, this wasn't really the story I expected when I went into this, but I truly enjoyed it. I think it's a beautifully written debut and a bittersweet story about these 2 sisters. I definitely recommend checking this out. I'm really glad that I read it, and I think it has some appeal for fantasy readers and contemporary readers. It covered a lot of things that I really like in stories and did it in a very unique way. That's all for me today. I'm really glad I got to read this book and talk about it. Let me know if you pick this one up or if you're planning to. I'd love to hear what you think about this book. That's all for me today. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time. Bye.